This is the Westminster Standard Podcast. I'm Ryan Beasy. Welcome. Today we are joined by two returning guests, Nate Zanders, one of my former brothers of Tennessee Valley Presbytery, and Zach Garris, fellow board member on Jude 3 and the PCA. Welcome, brothers. You want to provide a brief background reminder of where you are?
Go ahead, Nate.
Sure. Yeah. I'm Nate Zanders. I'm a teaching elder at Christ the King Church in Louisville, Tennessee, here in the Tennessee Valley Presbytery. And I am deeply grieved that I no longer get to see Ryan 4 times a year at Presbytery. Now I only get to see him once at General Assembly, but you're going to be missed, at least by me and our Presbytery. I'm not sure how everybody else will feel about it, but a quick story. He was our stated clerk for a hot minute before he left. And he was made so uncomfortable, Zach, when they gave him a standing ovation for his work as he was, and you could see how uncomfortable he was, and I loved it. I loved it all the more that he was, he's a humble guy, and he did a great job as clerk. But yeah, I'm the father of 4, 3 sons and a daughter. And I am on the editorial board of reformingmen.com, and we have a podcast called the Reforming Men Podcast. And it's amazing. I've been trying to get Zach on for a few months. I still need to have an episode with him talking about his books. And but that's who I am, what I do, and yeah.
And Zach, you're in New Mexico.
That's right, northern New Mexico, Los Alamos area, the nuclear lab. That's what everybody knows the area for. Bryce Avenue Presbyterian Church. I'm the pastor there, and let's see, I have 3 sons now, keeping me busy, and I write at knowing-scripture.com, and then for various things, including X posts that I did the other day, which we'll get to. So
yes, yeah, looking forward to that. Now, just want to check in, make sure. Nate, last time you were on here, one of our colleagues in Presbytery made some allegations against you. Anything come of that? Were you ever
I don't know if I'd call them allegations. I mean, just long story short, we had a disagreement over an evaluation that I had publicly of public content posted by one of our agencies, and a group of men from the Presbytery looked into it and were like, there's nothing to see here. Nate's done nothing wrong. And that's been that. It's all been good and kosher ever since. And yeah, it's water under the bridge.
Very, very good. Glad to hear you were exonerated. And Zach, you are currently under indictment for, as I understand it, quoting scripture and stating things on social media that cannot be proven. Is that, do I understand correctly that that's the issue?
Yeah, there's 2 charges. I mean, I'm sure some of this will get released at some point, and we'll see what comes of things, hoping for justice and impartiality in the Presbytery, of course. But yeah, at least one of the charges, they're both related to the 9th commandment, and one is alleging that they differ over my, it's basically an opinion of something I stated from Scripture. So I'm not sure how that's 9th commandment issue, but we'll see how these things play out.
Well, we'll see if the prosecutor can prove his case, and we'll pray for justice. Obviously, that's what we want. So we come to our topic today. Is there an attempt, or have there been attempts to infiltrate the PCA with a progressive agenda, feminist agenda? It stems from this series of emails and book recommendations from the Alliance for Mission and Renewal. It's a progressive group. I know that at least one of our colleagues on social media took umbrage to it being referred to as a progressive group. But nonetheless, is it a successor to the National Partnership, would you say?
I don't know how it isn't. It seems there's pretty clear ties as far as a lot of the same names. I mean, those National Partnership emails were leaked, and so I've never heard anyone actually deny the connection. Maybe they do, but there's certainly an attempt to be more open and public with the Alliance for Mission and Renewal, and they have statements on their website, and we can look at some of those. But
And they have a public website, and just the national partnership was that secret email group that contained some politicking and some fairly nasty statements about presbyteries and personalities who disagreed. But there are overlapping personnel between the national partnership and the Alliance for Mission and Renewal. But also overlapping goals. I mean, one of the goals of the national partnership was, you see here, this email from 2019, provide the means for unordained. Okay, so there's unordained women to serve as voting members of boards and agencies, to see unordained men and women laboring fully in the denomination. So there's a point that the national partnership was seeking to put unordained men and unordained women into various sorts of positions in the denomination.
It's a Scooby-Doo meme. It's who's really under here, and it's it would be like if our blog / podcast, if people didn't like it and we're getting a bunch of heat, imagine me and two of the board members adding a fourth board member and then calling it like sanctifying manhood. It's like it's the same. It's a rebrand. It's not really all that different. And quite frankly, I don't really care. I didn't really care that the national partnership existed. I just opposed their, I opposed their goals. You know what I mean? And so, I don't know why they would deny that this is a rebrand. It just, what's the big deal? Just call it what it is, and it shouldn't be that big of a deal. If you're nervous about the idea, if someone's nervous about the idea that this is the same group in a more public sense under a different heading, why would that be why is that such a scary idea that's what this is? If there was no big deal with the national partnership, why is it such a problem now that they've got more of a public brand, public name with clearly stated goals? I'm all for clarity and transparency. Yeah, I'm all for it.
Well, I guess one question though is what exactly are their goals? Are those clearly stated? In an interaction with Reverend Radney, he was denying that the group is progressive, and then he defined it. He said the Alliance for Mission Renewal exists to help foster a unified, faithful, and flourishing PCA. And then I basically responded. I said that those are meaningless platitudes. They don't tell us anything about what the organization's actually doing. And so he did clarify, though I'd like to question this. He said the Alliance for Mission Renewal wants the PCA to remain what it has been, a conservative, evangelical, mainline, Presbyterian, and Reformed denomination. Of course, when it comes to the issue at hand, which we'll be discussing, women, leading worship and commissioning co-laborers and deaconesses and all these things, I'm not sure that those fit into any of these descriptors, except maybe mainline, which, I mean, even that doesn't really tell you anything. But if we're talking about evangelical or conservative, and we're going back to like the founding of the PCA, if we're conserving the founding of the PCA, then these things don't fall under those descriptions. So I guess what I would like is more transparency about the goals of the Alliance for Mission and Renewal. And I think we can read those. We're seeing some of those from this latest article, this book list recommendation, book recommendation list that we'll look at. But but I don't think those are necessarily listed on their website. One thing I'll note, they had one of their goals on the website, Alliance for Mission Renewal, earnestly welcoming, valuing, and co-laboring with our sisters in Christ as they serve the Savior. Of course, no one would deny that, so that's not really descriptive.
But what does that mean?
Yeah.
Right. We'll find out here, I think. But
I also don't understand what the problem with it. Like the idea that they deny that they're progressive. I mean, progressive compared to who? Like if we're talking about Presbyterianism, how could you not see that this is progressive? Like in the history of our tradition, really in the history of Christianity, history of the entire world, this is very progressive. And to me, again, I just don't understand. Like when someone says, "Hey, Nate, you're kind of conservative." No, I'm a traditionalist. I am right of conservatives, and I don't have any problem with just embracing being able to look at the landscape and say, yeah, I can't really call myself a conservative because I'm not here. I'm here. I don't understand. This is very progressive compared to where we were even 1973 as the PCA. You look at the room, you look at the picture from that first GA, it's dudes in all suits and ties. You really can't tell the difference between a teaching elder and a ruling elder from the photo because they're all pretty much dressed uniformly. And it's a distinctly male-led denomination unapologetically. And 50 years later, we're being told, here's some different things we need to advocate for, which is pretty clearly a progressive trajectory from where we started. I don't get it. I don't understand why people can't just embrace what they are.
Let me also blow up this because they like to appeal to the founding of the PCA. I know Radney and then Sean Lucas, they did that interview, and this is not accurate how they're portraying things, because what happened, I think everybody knows this to some extent, but the early PCA wasn't as reformed as we maybe would have liked. There was a strongly reformed segment. There was more of a broadly evangelical segment. And I do think in some ways the PCA has become more reformed, more committed to the Westminster standards over the years in some ways. But
isn't that the nature of the Reformation, though?
Yeah, well, yes. I mean, officers were vowing to these things from the get-go, 1973, so they should have taken them all seriously. But the point is there was some breadth as far as like evangelicalism. But what we need to be very clear about is what that breadth involved. And even some of those things were not entirely in line with the Westminster standards, and so they shouldn't have been, happening. But when we're talking female participation in leading the worship service or deaconesses, all these things, those were not part of that at the founding. And so there's some equivocation here or deception, or I don't know exactly what they're trying to do, or just erroneous arguments. That breadth of evangelicalism that was there in 1973, it does not follow from that we should be having women, leading all of these things in the PCA and functional female officers. So that's why I just think that line of argument is totally wrong, and though that some people are actually trying to make it. So,
yeah, and maybe another way of saying that is we've become more reformed, but that doesn't mean that in 1973, culturally speaking, when it comes to gender roles, we were already super progressive or progressive at all. You can, I know some people that are Calvinistic evangelicals that are pretty hardcore, male headship in their position. They're not egalitarian. And so the idea that we can say, well, we were more evangelical and less reformed in 1973, therefore, we shouldn't have a problem with these views on gender roles it doesn't equate. It doesn't follow,
Well, and the founders were certainly aware of ordination of women to diaconate to elder, or using women in diaconal roles, or allowing unordained women deacons. They were aware of that.
Because they dealt with it in the
PCUS. And that's why they left. One of the significant reasons for their departure. And then when the RPCES was absorbed because they ran out of money and needed the PCA to come and swoop in with our empty pulpits and deep pockets, they made no provision for the continuation of deaconesses. So the PCA, since 1973, has had a firm line on male-only ordination, male-only diaconate, and yet there's this ongoing tension. And that's one of the goals of both the National Partnership and the Alliance for Mission and Renewal, to utilize women in diaconal roles, even if unordained. There was a recent podcast from the Alliance for Mission and Renewal that said women feel sidelined. I think Zach maybe even quoted from that article that women in their churches are feeling sidelined. I have never had a lady come to me in the churches that I've served and say, I feel sidelined. I really, unless I have a title. I correct one time. A woman came up and said that she really needed to have her name in the bulletin, and she ended up being shown to be not in the church for the right reasons. So why is it that they are in a certain type of church? Seems to be, at least if we can take the podcast and this article from which you're screenshotting, Zach, why is it that there's a groundswell there for women who don't feel like they are appreciated, valued, that they feel like they're sidelined without titles and roles and offices?
Well, yeah, I don't have this problem in my church. And so I'm not sure exactly what's going on in these churches. I mean, we do know the culture. The culture obviously wants, full equality for roles and offices and all of these things for men and women. And so we know there's cultural pressure there. I guess the question for ministers in these churches is why their women are raising an issue, or is it the officers raising an issue? I mean, it can work both ways. Certainly, if you don't preach and teach on these things, then you might have congregants who just adopt cultural feminism, and then they might get upset about things. But that's why it's so important to preach on these things. And I'm also well aware if you do, you might drive some people away. But at the end of the day, that's okay. We don't just go for maximum numbers. We also consider the purity of the church and our duties to preach on these matters. And frankly, by people not addressing this, not teaching our standards and our BCO, and frankly what we think Scripture teaches, it's causing problems for the PCA at large that we're even having this debate and discussion. So.
Well, there was a sermon series that addressed some of these topics at a church pastored by, I believe, teaching under Kyle Wells. And after that, after one of the sermons, there was a Q&A, I believe, and both teaching under Wells and his wife were answering questions. And I believe a lot of the subjects were about women's roles. And Mrs. Wells speaks to the feeling of sideline. I'd like to play that video and get your thoughts on maybe that can help us understand what they mean by sidelined.
Growing up in the complementarian church, I feel like I did receive direct encouragement from pastors and seminary professors in my gifts of theological knowledge. But I feel like when I looked into my tradition's teaching on gender, that the general attitude toward women was one that treated especially women with theological gifts as if they were children approaching the cookie jar. And it was kind of like, nope, you can't go that far. Don't touch that. So I found that very discouraging to find that the majority of complementarian literature focused on what women could not do. And while I have had great interactions with a number of godly men over the course of my life, I have also received some direct and indirect slights from men in my tradition. I had a college Bible study leader who, in response to my question about his teaching on 1 Peter, tell me that I just need to accept what he says because he is a man. I've also had laymen in my home with no theological education very purposefully exclude me from conversation at the dinner table because they want to chew the theological fat with my husband, who has a PhD. And so I will say that I come to this conversation as a wounded person. I feel like I have been wounded by men in our tradition who have belittled me. I also feel wounded by egalitarian women who have treated me with contempt for even being associated with this denomination. But I would also like to say that I am also wounding because I do carry a lot of pain and bitterness about this topic. I wounded my own husband this week out of my bitterness. And I think that's important to say because a lot of us are probably coming to this conversation and we are both wounded and wounding. So I would just like to reiterate what Susan said at the beginning about wanting to bring a lot of grace to this conversation. Because I think no matter where we land on what the Bible has to say about women and gender roles in the church, we can say with certainty that the Lord certainly doesn't want this wounding to continue within his body. So with that, we can get on with the discussion.
Yeah, thanks, Pam. So we're actually going to start a little bit.
So there may be some specifics of experiences that she's had that made her feel sidelined, and her husband is the author of this recommended resource list that we'll see. And some of those are obviously regrettable. I mean, if you're at a Bible study and it's a mixed gender Bible study, and you make a theological point, and the response of the man leading the Bible study is, "Well, you need to listen to me because I'm a man," rather than proving it from the text. I mean,
Yeah, I don't have any reason. I don't have any reason to. I'm very sympathetic towards what you're saying.
Oh, yeah.
I would wonder though, did he actually say that, or was that her takeaway? Right. If he did say that, that bothers me tremendously.
Absolutely.
But you know, sometimes when I've had to catch myself lately when someone says, "Well, this person said this," I've had to stop and say, "Is that your summary of what you took away, or is that like verbatim what the guy was saying?" No, so I can totally believe that this happened. I certainly have lots of compassion for her. One of the things I appreciate about her is that she seems to be very honest with the fact that she's received critique from egalitarian women who are despising her for being, even remotely right of them on this subject. And she is able to confess that she's had some bitterness and she's been disrespectful towards her husband and seems to be repentant of that. But just the way she's speaking, she's very feminine, as she should be. Because she's a woman. Because there's a lot of women that have experienced what she's experienced, and they're very abrasive, they're very mean, they're very bitter, hostile towards and suspicious of male authority. And so I would just commend her for the softness and cheerfulness with which she was able to communicate that in front of a group of people. I think that's to be commended.
Absolutely.
Having said that,
is this going to be one of those compliment sandwiches?
Well, no, having said that, I appreciate that she enjoys theology and that my wife is not going to read any of the theological textbooks I have on my shelf, so my wife's very different. But hopefully she could also understand why a young man with no theological training wants to look to their pastor, particularly a guy who has a PhD, who's very gifted and well-trained. I would, I don't know. I think that's a tough spot, because if you're a young man and you're going to your pastor's home and you've got questions, he seems like the right guy to go to. So I guess I'm just maybe because I'm not in the room when that's happening, I can't see, because there's a way to go about that that's respectful, and there's a way to go about that that's disrespectful to the pastor's wife.
I mean, maybe he was belittling, but when I heard that, I thought, well, when I was in college, a number of times our professors in the history department would have us over to their homes for meals, and I loved to sit there and pick, the brain of my professor, because he had the PhD. He was an expert in this field, and I knew nothing. I mean, I knew as much as Sergeant Schultz did, but now if his wife, who may have also been interested in theology, may have had some graduate studies in theology, kept wanting to chime in, I would be a little bit annoyed. Sure. I would think, because I'm here because I want to get the deep things of the Russian Revolution or whatever.
Right.
So, but then if the man who did that, this unordained man, was belittling or rude, I can certainly see that would be offensive, but also maybe there's some unrealistic expectations. Zach, anything?
Yeah, I agree with what you guys said so far, but I think I have two observations. One is I'm not a fan of the language of wounding and being wounded. This is part of the problem with all of this is some of this, feminine language ends up controlling the conversations, discussions, and how men are approaching these things. And while some people may have certainly sinned against her, that shouldn't drive our doctrine or how we approach these things. I mean, we should be sensitive, obviously, to congregants, and when we're preaching on these matters, we have to be aware of the culture, and people have been hurt on these things. I mean, that's fine. I just don't like this being totally effeminized.
What language would you have her use instead? Like, because I agree, I don't use wounded language, I like to say, hey, we're kind of stepping on each other's air hoses. It's like,
yeah, I mean, it's kind of like the word trauma that just gets
Sure.
overly
Yeah.
and abused, frankly. And so,
Yeah.
it just ends up, this is just such loaded language, and I think we should avoid.
Yeah.
I'd rather just say this guy, said something offensive to me, and maybe you could just say sinned. Whatever it is, I have had some bad experiences, but when we just say wounded, it's really loaded language. So that's one thing. But the second is, she went to seminary. She said, I think she said she got a master's. Did she say in arts? I'm not a master of arts. I'm not sure. But here, this is a whole nother, conversation. But women getting seminary degrees, I think, is slightly problematic. Not because we oppose women receiving theological education. Of course, as pastors, we're providing theological training to women all the time. But I think the purpose of seminary is to train ministers. That's why they started them in Princeton, 1812, and So this is a whole issue with modern seminaries having lots of women, and it doubles tuition dollars and all of this. But then what I'm trying to get at is it ends up being tied with women. They go to seminary. Whether some of them are getting MDivs, Master of Divinities, the pastor's degree. Sometimes they get a Master of Arts or a counseling degree or whatever. And then they think, well, I need to use it, right? And therein lies part of the problem and that was kind of in the background of what she was saying.
Yeah.
And so women are getting these theological degrees, and then people like us are saying, well, you can use this, for your own benefit in women's ministry and whatever, but they end up wanting to use it in a way they ought not to, whether it's, becoming a pseudo pastor in the church, or,
right.
For women. And so I realize they'll couch it in the terms, well, we're only teaching women. And I'm like, yeah, but that's still the pastor's job, like to teach doctrine to men and women. And so I just think this is a huge problem in all of this. And so when we then say you can't do X, whatever it is, they take offense at it because, well, I have the theological training. Shouldn't I be able to use it? And I'm like, well, the missteps were already done. I'm sorry. Like, so anyway, that's my thought on that whole situation.
Yeah, it's not a slippery slope. It's like the children's book, If You Give a Mouse a Cookie. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of that book.
Of course I read it.
Yeah, it's like before you know it, the mouse is like moved in and made himself at home, and it doesn't just stop there, right? And so I'm in agreement on that. And also just changes the whole learning environment when there's women in the classroom with men. There's been it makes it. I remember when I was at Covenant, we were asking in a New Testament class, I believe, someone was raising their hand and saying, how do we apply this particular principle in pastoral ministry? And, that was kind of the flow of the conversation. How do we apply this one day when we're pastors? And then eventually a female in the class raised her hand and said, hey, it's really hard to hear you guys ask that questions because we're not going to be pastors one day. Like, we're going to do different work. And so I don't remember if there was a request for us as male students to maybe not phrase it that way. And that was a little, and that was in that particular female student, wonderful human, but again, this is an MDiv course. We're training to be pastors. If someone's there for a different reason, I think the onus is on them to adapt to the situation. But the natural male tendency is for us to then try to, serve our wife or our sister or daughter or whoever to kind of acquiesce. And seminaries where there's only men in MDiv classrooms, they don't have to deal with this. And I think that's actually better for the male students. And if the point of a seminary education, particularly in MDiv, is to train men for the ministry, we should be emphasizing and focusing on that. So I don't know. I still haven't finished my deep dive into this, but I don't know how many seminaries in America are left that just give MDivs to men. And when I ask seminary representatives, they'll say, well, women can take the MDiv, but not the pastoral tract.
Then what's the purpose of the MDiv?
It's like, yeah, that's what this is, So Zach and you and I may have a slight disagreement on women being in seminaries, but my opinion about the MDiv is that it should be exclusively for men. Don't give me this funny business about the church planting tract and the pastoral ministry tract and then the just non-ministry tract. Don't, this
Well,
is
let me note this. I think there's a difference between theological schools and seminaries. So that's my main concern is seminaries are for training pastors. That's what they were originally for. They've modified that where that's generally still their primary focus, but because of outside, influences and whatnot, they tend to accept women. I don't think they should take women at all. But even if they do, I'm in full agreement that they should, your MDiv courses should be men. You should be able to have discussions about the pastorate because that's what you're training for.
Yeah.
I mean, part of it is seminaries also. It's not even just about females. It's also their focus has often been shifted even towards academia, and I'm not a fan of that either in general. But
yeah,
this is kind of another issue. If I could address one other thing, though, she said complementarianism and all these discussions are always about what women can't do. I do agree we need to have a positive vision about what women can do and should do in the church. But I'll also note that when we do this from the scriptures, not everybody always likes that. The reason is the emphasis of the Bible for women is on motherhood and the home and making sure that the family is ordered and running well. Of course, the father and husband is the head of the home, but you have Ryan's pulling up Titus, 1 Timothy 2 and Titus 2 and Titus 2. That's really the go-to passage. I actually just preached on this. The older women training the younger women, and it particularly is on family works and duties.
It's domestic.
It's domestic, yeah. So it's calling the older women to train the younger women in domestic duties. And so, but I realize that's countercultural, and so some women don't want to hear that, and then they would rather do they want offices and the like. So
yeah, none of the I'm not that great at Greek, but none of the phrases here in this passage in Titus would lead us to believe that God envisions women teaching other women in biblical or systematic theology.
That's right. In fact, so they are to teach what is good. It's actually it's a noun. They're to be teachers of the good, and so train or encourage. You could translate it the young women to be these things, to be husband lovers, children lovers, self-controlled, pure, working at home, kind, or it's literally good, submissive to their own husbands. So yes, the focus is not doctrinal, but actually very practical and related to Christian virtue, and those are very important things. We don't just teach people systematic theology. That's important, but so is Christian virtue.
Yeah.
As with officer qualifications, I mean, there's only one that is doctrinal skill. The rest are virtues, Christian virtues.
And the field is wide open for this. I mean, there are just a lot of Christian young women who are struggling. They need a mentor. They need these older women in the church to come alongside them. I mean, so many boomer women have said, I've raised my kids, mission accomplished. We're done. And it's like, well, there's grandchildren and spiritual daughters and granddaughters and grandsons that need your ministry here in this very practical way. I mean, you think about it, when you're raising kids, when a man and a woman are raising kids together, they're raising beings that are going to outlive the stars. How is that a small task? At what point did we as Christians look at that and say, that's not that important? So I think the Titus 2 ministry that is set before us here for older women to take up is huge. And there's a need for it.
All of the older theologians used to talk about, parenting, but motherhood in particular is just, this is the most influential work in the world. And so all of this is wrapped up with our culture's really attack on motherhood, devaluing of motherhood, and that's even tied with stay-at-home wives. And as if that's not work. I mean, it's absolutely work. It's hard work. It's just that a lot of people don't want to do it.
Yeah. I mean, you think about it, there's a few theologians that have had a major impact on all three of the major streams of Christianity, Orthodox, Catholic, and Protestant, and one of which is Augustine. Where would Augustine have been without his mother, Monica? You know, the role that she played in church history in being a godly mother who fulfilled the Titus 2:3-5 mandate is overlooked. And I think in part, obviously God is sovereign, but God used a woman being faithful to a text like this to create, to mold and shape a man that would become one of the greatest theologians, of all time. I mean, we shouldn't miss that.
And Lois and Eunice for Timothy.
Yeah, that's right.
And so they're biblical examples, but I'm probably the least conservative guy on this particular panel here. I'm the liberal of the bunch. That doesn't happen very often. But when I in the church that I just concluded as pastor, there was a request from the ladies to do a book study, and I think they wanted to read a Rosaria Butterfield book. And one of the elders wisely made this point that we need to encourage the women in a Titus 2 ministry, but on the other hand, we don't want all women's Bible study material to be just so sappy, silly, and emotional. I mean, I think that's another point that is made at another time in that address, is that a lot of women's study material isn't very meaty. And we do want women to be, at least I think, one of the things I love about the church I currently serve is in their circles also. They're not reading, the women's daily devotional. They're reading a Derek Thomas book on the life of Peter. Which I think is great. Women do need to know the Bible.
That's right.
And study the Bible together and know systematic theology, I think, but that does not to the detriment of a Titus 2 ministry. Just like men. Men need to know systematic theology. Men need to, but not to the detriment of that picture in 1 Timothy 3 and Titus 1.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, Ryan. I don't think women's fellowship groups and whatnot studying the Bible together or theology is prohibited by any means. I just think the problem is it ends up taking over, where to the neglect of Titus 2.
Yeah.
And then sometimes develops into like a competitive ministry in the church, like it's its own thing. And I think we even have churches like this where they then have a woman. She's not just a woman's coordinator. She's essentially functioning like a female pastor, but what makes that all the worse, you could say, oh, well, she's not violating 1 Timothy 2:12 because she's not teaching or exercising authority over men, just women. But the problem is she's not ordained. She doesn't have the accountability of male elders and pastors, and that's just not the way God designed it. And so. But yeah, this is the whole alongside care stuff. I mean, that's tied up with all of what we're getting into here. So
yeah.
Let's move into that. So there was an interaction, I think that Zach, you noted, that dealt with. Is this just a reading list, or is this a recommended reading list? Because there's some, I guess we call it serious issues with the substance of it, right? Yeah. There we go. George Sayor calling it like it is. This is a problematic reading list.
Yeah, you want me to comment on that? So
yeah, would you please?
So just to be clear, this is January 29th, 2026. Reverend Kyle Wells wrote an article titled "A Pastoral Resource List on Women and Ministry," published on the website for the Alliance for Mission and Renewal. And he does qualify this. So I tried to be very fair to him in my post, which was an analysis with some criticism, but it's presented as a reading list, and he says, so here's what he writes. It intentionally spans multiple perspectives within the Reformed and evangelical world. These resources are not offered as endorsements, but as tools. They're designed to help pastors and sessions engage the biblical data with patience and care. Okay, so he does give that qualifier. However, he is recommending the books, even if he says they're just tools. And one thing we have to note is he gives a very clear qualification at the very end. He gives a list of outright egalitarian books by Gupta, Hugenberger, etc. And he gives the qualification for pastoral awareness and discernment. So he's very clearly stating there with that phrase that this section right here is for your awareness and discernment. These are egalitarian books. I took that as him saying I don't recommend them, but he doesn't include that qualification for the other books, and so this whole list is angled in an egalitarian direction. I mean, my conclusion is, because I've read a lot of these, and I'm familiar with the range of complementarianism, I would label his view a very narrow complementarianism. Now, I mean, I don't necessarily love the word complementarian for this reason. This is one of the reasons I don't like it, is it's so broad that it can sometimes be useless. He's not advocating women elders being ordained as elders. So let's just be very clear. We want to represent his position properly, but he also recommends books that I would say are very much a problem. I list those, such as, and I have some of them here, Michael Bird's Bourgeois Babes, Bossy Wives, and Bobby Haircuts. Quite the title. Michael Bird, he says Bird is not an egalitarian because he prefers, or I think that's the language, to have men as like the head pastor or something like that. I've read enough Bird to know I think the guy's pretty clearly egalitarian. I don't think he has a problem with female elders or pastors in general. It's been a while since I read this book, but it's published by Zondervan. There's two others that are on that list that are both published by Zondervan. This one is by Kathy Keller, Jesus, Justice, and Gender Roles: A Case for Gender Roles in Ministry. Now, this one causes a stir in the PCA because it gets recommended a lot by PCA pastors, though I am very critical of this book. I'm not a fan. And the reason is this book, while again defending male-only elders, it encourages and really opens it up for women to the arguments. It tries to for women to lead significant portions of the public worship service outside of preaching. She would say, because that's the PCA's position, right? Is women can't preach. But churches are allowing all sorts of other things, outside of that. We can get into that, but I think that's a modern innovation, even for the PCA.
Yeah.
But there's another book that I think on there I labeled the most. I said one of Wells' worst recommendations, and it's this one, John Dixon's "Hearing Her Voice." Now, I have an older version, or at least the subtitle's different. Mine says "A Biblical Invitation for Women to Preach." The subtitle of the one he had is "A Case for Women Giving Sermons." I don't know, both of those are bad in my opinion. So he says this is a tool. That's the preface of the article, is these are just tools, resources. But here's what Wells comments. He says his work, referring to Dixon. Well, let me read the full line. Even if one rejects that conclusion, and he's referring back to what he said, is Dixon argues that teaching in 1 Timothy 2 refers specifically to safeguarding apostolic tradition, a function he believes ceased after the apostolic age. So then Wells writes, even if one rejects that conclusion, his work shows how women can exhort and preach under elder oversight, a pattern found in much of the global church, for example, Ethiopia, Sri Lanka. Now, I see no other way to read this than Wells actually endorsing not the main point of the book, or part of it about teaching, but he is endorsing the argument that Dixon, like he says, his work shows how women can exhort and preach under elder oversight. We've seen this view before. It is very narrow. I mean, guys will still call themselves complementarian, and they'll hold this position. But one of the problems is this is directly at odds. I think with Scripture, and we can argue that. But the PCA's Book of Church Order 12.5e, and which says that the session is to make sure only qualified men preach. There have been discipline cases on this very matter. New York Metro had a woman preach several years ago.
And just recently, there was some.
Is there another
judgment.
one?
No, I mean there was some judgment that's not ancient history.
Right.
That
No,
happened
right.
several years ago, but just recently the assembly finally adjudicated, and the presbytery adjudicated, and I believe the minister involved, Craig Higgins, left the PCA
Yes.
for a compliment for a feminist denomination.
Yes, and because if I remember, it was him who took the position. He was actually saying he differed with the PCA's rules on this. He was trying to state a difference of some sort. So anyway, and that got flagged by RPR, I think. But that's neither here nor there. But yeah, so he left. So I mean, this is the thing with this narrow complementarian position. It's very narrow. It's basically saying, while we don't think women can serve as elders or pastors, they can do the functions of elders and pastors in some ways and in some circumstances, like this being preaching under the authority of the elders. I don't see that in Scripture. I don't see how that doesn't violate 1 Timothy 2:12 or various other teachings. But this is recommended. So to me, that was the worst recommendation in the list. I mean, there's other problems.
Yeah, so and that's an important point to make, that this is the worst recommendation in the list, but it's not the only troublesome, or how would you characterize it in terms of our Constitution? Subversive, problematic? I know Matt Walsh doesn't like that word, so I might get an email or something from some Matt Walsh fan boys. But
Well, subversive just means to try to change the system and the rules, but not following the rules. So, I mean, I don't know. He's not being very forthright, because if he wanted to change the PCO's BCO on that matter, I think you should just come out and say so, and then make an argument for it. We do that on, we have overtures every year trying to change the Book of Church Order.
But to be fair, he may not want to change. He may be being forthright. I mean, I don't want to say that he's not being forthright. I just wonder.
Yeah, I think, I've often said that the best way, it would be best if in the PCA we policed our own tribes. We all kind of have these different, camps in the PCA. We're basically like 2 or 3 denominations kind of all smuggled into one big tent. And, if I were one of his friends, I would hope that I would have the ability to pick up the phone and call him and say, hey, I want you should try to understand how this looks. And if this is your intention, then mission accomplished. But if not, consider what you're saying here. It would be like if some guy right of me in the PCA created a reading list that had a bunch of controversial stuff on it, and he was saying this author proves this, or his work shows this, because he doesn't say in this list this author's work claims or argues the point. It's that he shows it, he demonstrates, right? So I just think there was probably a better way for him to approach this. And, if we're going to be in a big tent, we have to be more clear. We have to recognize, as I've continued to say for years now, we have to recognize that life in the big tent is not super stable. And we need to, do our best to clearly state and uphold the truth between one man and another. And the more men you have in the room, so to speak, in the big tent, the more difficult that gets, especially as our beliefs and our views on things are so broad for a denomination. So this was, the words have meaning. And I think this is I think this brother would probably like a redo in how he phrased some of the explanations or summaries of these various books, but maybe he wouldn't. I don't know.
Well, right. I mean, obviously, we like clarity. We want both sides to be clear. I think I try to be clear when I speak on these things. But that's not the only issue. I mean, I'll just raise the one with deacons. As I wrote, he recommends works that outright argue for ordaining female deacons. Now he doesn't, but then he doesn't say that that's his position. Is that I want to ordain women as deacons? And he does recommend what is a good book, Van Dam's The Deacon, which opposes women ordaining women as deacons. But then he also includes Robert Strimple's 1988 article, Phoebe Was a Deacon, Other Women Should Be Too, and Benjamin Merkel's 2021 Jets article, Journal Evangelical Theological Society, and that is titled The Authority of Deacons in Pauline Churches. And here's what he says. This is Wells' comment, the author. He says, quote, Merkel argues that the office's non-governing nature makes room for women deacons. And he quotes, this is his quote. He's adding Romans 16:1 and 2, 1 Timothy 3:11. So he doesn't say, I think we should ordain women deacons, and here's some books in favor of that. But the whole thrust of what he says and recommends is in that direction. So I agree. We want clarity and transparency, but we have not gotten that on this issue in the PCA. We've gotten the whole commissioning deaconesses, and we occasionally get someone up that stands at the mic at GA and says, I actually favor ordaining women as deacons. We've had this. And then we go, yeah, we thought that, but most people aren't saying it.
You said the quiet part out loud, huh?
Yeah.
Well, and this is in the resource section. This is in the recommended resource. So this is not just, as you note, Zach, there's a section where you've got some arguments that you need to be aware of. And far be it from any of us to say you should never read anything outside of your own theological camp. You should be encountering aberrant theological positions so that you can confront them, so you can sharpen your own understanding of Scripture. But here, right at the very top, what do you make of this being the first, maybe it's just alphabetical? Is he following the Chicago style here and Katie Turabian's work, just doing it alphabetically? But this is the first one, making room for women deacons. And so is this the Alliance doing a trial balloon of ordaining women deacons? I know we've got at least one overture out that would do that. The National Partnership, as far as I know, never advocated for ordained women deacons, but here the Alliance recommending resources by men who would ordain women deacons.
Yeah, and I mean, this is we know some in the PCA do want to ordain them. My thing is, if you want to commission women as deaconesses, I don't really see the difference between that and ordaining them, because I don't really know what commissioning means outside of granting authority to someone. And so it's putting them in a deacon-like position, and you might as well just go all the way. I think some have definitely been hoping that would be the case with the commissioning practice, which has been, I think, a problem for the last 20 years.
And I can put pictures on here of women being commissioned with hands laid on them by men and women. So what's the difference between commissioning and ordination when you're laying hands on someone?
Yeah.
That's a good question.
I mean, you think about it, when there's a difference in the PCA between a committee and a commission, right? And when we establish commissions, we're giving them authority. So how do we not see that when we commission someone to something that we're not giving them any authority? It doesn't really compute.
Well, later in that Q&A session, he talked about his view of 1 Timothy 2. Zach, would it be all right if we played that, and then Nate and Zach, you critique that and maybe see, does that influence this list here of recommended resources?
1 Timothy 2:15,
Right.
that is how she's saved.
Yeah, it's a very, I mean, the text is very complex, and it's very difficult, and that's a difficult one. And I'm not sure, to be honest, exactly what it means. There's a couple things to note, though. Paul moves from the singular, talking about men and women generally, to a woman. I permit no singular woman to teach to have authority over singular man. She is to keep silent. And then it says Adam was formed first, then Eve. Adam was not deceived, but the woman, speaking of Eve, was deceived and became a transgressor. And then it says, yet she continued. The woman, singular, will be saved through childbearing if, and then it's they, plural, continue in faith and love. And so it's the singulars and the plurals actually make it like really complex. Like, because you would think, so one of the answers is, what's going on here is that Paul is talking, he's just been talking about Eve. She was deceived and became a transgressor, and yet she is saved and the human race through childbearing, as in the proto-evangelion. So if we're following Genesis 2 to Genesis 3 in the story, Adam's created first, formed. Then we get Genesis 3, she's deceived. Then right after that, God comes to her and says, through the seed of the woman, I will crush the serpent, right? Who's just deceived her. And so that is one tack that I'm probably inclined towards. However, another one has to do with the fact that you have to understand that the Temple of Artemis was one of the 7 wonders of the world, and it was number 2. It's located in Ephesus. All the girls would have grown up knowing the Artemis myth. Part of the Artemis myth is that Artemis saved her brother during birth, like he would, and so then she becomes the goddess of childbearing. If you do not submit yourself and show piety to Artemis, then the question is, especially in a world, we have to understand this isn't a secular society. They believe gods were everywhere. You pass gods on the way to church, tons of them. Every household, there's a household god. So there's gods everywhere. So we would call it superstitious. They would just say we're crazy secular people. But if that's the case, then like women would have thought, and there would have been this pressure, if you don't worship and give allegiance to Artemis with your plaited hair and these kinds of things, you're going to die in childbirth, certainly. I mean, chances are you could die, but you're certainly going to die if you don't praise Artemis. And so another way to take is, because I do think that Paul uses certain language here that does reflect the Artemis myth. For instance, in Peter, he talks about women in modesty, but he uses different words. Here, he uses very specific words that have to do with the Artemis myth. So I think that though Paul is addressing church universally, he is talking specifically to particular things in the Ephesus context, and his language reflects that. And so the other option is that he's saying, look, you don't have to look to Artemis to save you. Jesus will save you, and even if you die in childbearing, he will still save you, because we believe in the resurrection of the dead and the life everlasting. So those who continue on in faith and love, right, and so like that, those who are actually trusting him and living like a godly life can be assured that no matter what happens, Jesus, not Artemis, will rescue you, and so you can give up that plaited hair thing. You can give up the Artemis myth.
So if I'm understanding, there's 2 possible responses. One is, I want to go back to the first one, but the second one is the Artemis myth and sort of the cultural piece of that. And the first one you were talking about, the childbearing, are you saying that that is singular in the sense that it could be referring to like the line of Jesus, like coming on down?
Eve. So yet
Okay.
she, as an Eve who became a transgressor, will be saved through childbearing, and then it's if they continue in faith and love. So it's very odd, the switch back and forth, and it's hard. It's a complex text. The other thing that he could be saying is childbearing is a synecdochic, so it's a synecdoche. A synecdoche is a part of speech where we would say like, oh, you know what's coming out of Washington. Well, when we say that, we mean not like the city, like that kind of thing. We're talking about Washington as a whole for like a very specific
Yeah,
thing.
did you see what Indiana did in the game the other day?
Right.
You
So
know, about the whole state.
in the same way, he could be using childbearing not as a sense of specifically childbearing, but just through being a woman and womanhood. And specifically, you do have in this text, like in this thing, people are being forbidden from marriage. Right, in chapter 4, verse 1, or chapter 4, verse 3, and they're saying to like abstain from these certain things. So it could be that there's a lot of false teaching going on. So it could be that they're being taught to abstain from marriage and basically family life, and that he's saying like, no, like you're going to be saved through that, like in that role or whatever. Not like you have to do this to be saved, but
Right. So there's maybe some vilification of that role that he's like redeeming back.
right. So I think that could be, so I mean, those are the 3 options, and if you ask me, I probably lean towards the first a little bit more because of the Adam, Eve, and the way that I see him telling that story so strongly, but it's hard.
Okay. I'm not sure what his view on 1 Timothy 2 is, but I don't have a PhD or a Juris Doctorate like one of you does, and I'm not in further graduate studies like the other of you. So, how do you think his view of 1 Timothy 2 has impacted that list, or has it? Is that important?
He's saying he doesn't know. He's saying he doesn't know. It's hard to tell. And so, yeah, if you don't know what this verse means, and there's, as far as I can tell, just from studying it over the last 3 or 4 days, there's like 6 or 7 different takes on this. But yeah, if you're not really sure, and you've already just made up your mind on all these things that women can do, you're going to have a natural barrier from accepting certain views that could eliminate all these other perspectives that you have about women, what women can and should be doing in the church. Does that make sense? Because if you have certain takes on this verse, particularly verse 15, it's going to eliminate you being able to promote or recommend a lot of the books on that list.
Yeah, it's probably not the most popular verse today from the Bible. It's not as clear as some of the other passages, obviously. We have 1 Timothy 5:14, where Paul says, he's speaking of widows. The younger widows, I would have them marry, bear children, and manage their households. And then we already mentioned Titus 2, with the older women train the younger women. So we have 2 passages already clearly directing women towards domestic work for the good of family, and then the church, the holy seed, and then we could say the world at large, humanity. But as far as this passage, I think one thing he did not get into that would help a lot would be the context. You read feminist literature, it's funny, they like to get into Artemis and all of the cultural stuff all the time. I'm not saying there's no place for it, but we do have context that is more helpful. So and I don't like to just read Jesus in every passage. Obviously the whole Bible points towards Christ and his work, but I don't think that's what 1 Timothy 2:15 is speaking of. I don't think it's talking about Eve or Mary. It does start off with the singular she, but she will be saved through the bearing of children if they remain. It does go plural. If they remain in faith and love and holiness with self-control. I think that it's going from Eve in verse. She's mentioned in verse 13. And then in verse 14, right? Well, let me read it. Because verse 13 says, "For it was Adam who was created first, and then Eve." So that's the basis for the prohibition of why women can't teach or exercise authority. In verse 12, verse 14, "And it was not Adam who was deceived, but the woman." Notice it doesn't say Eve, but the woman being deceived fell into transgression. And then verse 15 follows up and says, "But she will be saved through the bearing of children if they continue." So I think Paul is jumping from the singular woman, which started as Eve, but then he calls her the woman, as in verse 14, to then he's referring to women in general, continuing in faith and the like. So I think he's talking about women in general. I don't think he's saying they will be preserved in childbirth, though I realize that's one that could be translated. And I don't think it's saying that they'll be saved by having children. I think it's getting at the whole concept of women doing, and he mentioned this, the third view, the synecdoche view, a part representing the whole, is that the bearing of children is representative of work that is unique to women. And so if they do that which is womanly, which is part of holiness and faith, and tied with self-control, not doing stuff that they shouldn't do, then they will be saved. So you have to understand salvation in the broad sense. It's not just justification, which is by faith alone, but we're talking about salvation, which includes course, good works and all the like. So to support this, for the context, if you go back to verse 9, 1 Timothy 2:9, where he says, I want women to adorn themselves with proper clothing, modestly, etc. So he's speaking about modest behavior. Then verse 10, this is key, but rather by means of good works, as is proper for women making a claim to godliness. So that's the context, is women's good works, feminine godliness, proper godliness for women, which is distinct from men. There's a lot of overlap. There are certain things that men should do for manly godliness that women shouldn't, and vice versa. And then you have the most controversial verses here. Verse 11, a woman must quietly receive instruction with entire submissiveness. Verse 12, but I do not allow a woman to teach or exercise authority over man, but to remain quiet. So the whole context is Paul is prohibiting women from exercising authority over men, right? That's not something women should be doing in the church. They shouldn't be teaching men formally, publicly. They shouldn't be exercising authority over men. So they shouldn't be elders, right? I mean, I think this is one of the go-to passages for that point. And then in context, that's what leads him to saying that women will be saved through bearing children, meaning they need to do that which is feminine. So if we tie this with Titus 2, and then later in 1 Timothy chapter 5, verse 14, they need to be domestic. They're supposed to be moms. That's a great thing. So we could apply this today, rather than trying to be elders in the church or commissioned co-laborers or whatever it is, go be a mom. And if you're older and you're, that's fine. Go train the younger women. That's what Paul says.
And that's what a shepherdess does, right?
Yeah, no shepherdesses. Yeah, no shepherdesses. So
we want to invent words to give people titles.
What's that?
If we want to invent words to give people titles and make them feel
right.
official.
Yeah. That's not good. But Paul commands self-restraint, self-control, and when women are demanding, offices in the church that are not warranted, that is lack of self-restraint. They're violating 1 Timothy 2, this whole section. So anyway, that's my take on it. I think the context helps make sense of what in isolation would definitely be a hard passage. So.
And so do you see that lack of certainty then reflected in the A4MR's reading list, recommended reading list?
Well, the narrow complementarian position takes the narrowest views possible of these passages and goes from there. So yes. So you can't go anywhere with 1 Timothy 2:15. You would even want to raise some questions about 1 Timothy 2:9. 2:12, though you would recognize, well, he does say, that's pretty clear. That's usually how they would go. It's pretty clear. He says, I don't allow a woman to teach or exercise authority over man. Okay, so that seems to be saying they can't preach. But then notice this is where the John Dickson book goes, is, well, but that's not apostolic teaching. Paul's prohibiting apostolic teaching. That's what Dickson would say. Okay. And then, well, are they really exercising authority if the women are doing it under the authority of the session? So see, I mean, this is it gets crazy.
It get just whittled down to,
yes,
and that's why it's called very narrow.
Very narrow, but they have some position that they're such as narrow. If you're complementarian, if you're going to claim that label, you have to hold something, which would be that's not egalitarian, which would be that I don't, in this case, I don't think women can be elders or pastors. So, but everything else is kind of an open question. That's really the direction of all of this.
Well, Nate, what are we to make of the efforts by progressives in the PCA to put women in positions of authority and responsibility that historically and I think we would argue biblically have been the duties of godly men?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, we just don't know what women are for. We don't know what men are for. we have a paper in the PCA on women in the military, and yet a lot of brothers in the PCA think that women serving the armed services they shouldn't do it because it's not, quote, fitting. It's not. It's kind of like saying, hey, we shouldn't make this guy the star center of our basketball team because he's like 5'8". He's just not. It's just not a suitable thing for him. But we could do it. It's just not the best idea. Rather than, I think Zach and I would say, we shouldn't do this because warfare is waged precisely to protect women and children. The analogy I like to use is this. It's not really an analogy. It's just like a line of thought. If my wife and I are lying in bed and someone starts breaking in our front door, which my wife thinks happens once a month, it's really just the kid across the street slamming his car door at 1 a.m. But if I said, sweetheart, I'm tired, you go deal with it. Here's the Glock 45. You go check this out. If any of my male friends heard that that's how I handled that situation, they should and they would ridicule me for being a pansy and for making my wife do what is my job as a man, right? We all know this. Now, why in the world then would I put my wife in body armor, give her a cruiser, a 12 gauge or an M4, and say, now go patrol the streets of our city and make it safe? Go be a law enforcement officer. Why do so many men not have a problem with sending their daughters and their wives to do that? And then to take it one step further, now you're going to do all that, but you're going to drive around on foreign soil, securing our interests, whatever regime change, all the different reasons we could have war abroad. Go do that. Totally fine. It doesn't make any sense. If we wouldn't send our wife to the door with a gun instead of going ourselves, why would we send them outside of our door to protect and to keep society? It doesn't make any sense. And yet we see men in the PCA, their daughters are going into the armed services and they have no problem with it. And I think that's, despite the fact that we have a position paper on this kind of thing, we just don't seem to understand what our role is as men in society, and we seem to be continuing in the sin of our father Adam, which is passivity. We're allowing women in the church and in the civil sphere to go out and do the role for us. There's a PCUSA church not too far from me, and I talked to one of their ruling elders, and they are not an egalitarian church theologically. It was just there wasn't enough men to step up and fill the positions, and there were women who were available and eager and willing to do it. And I think that is behind so much in our society, is that we're just not willing to do what we're called to do. And there's a lot of women who haven't been rightly taught by their fathers, their husbands, their pastors, how God has designed them, what they can do and should do in society. So they're willing to step into that void. So I think I asked a theologian this a few years ago. He would bristle at me calling him a theologian, but I said, hey, we're starting to recover a doctrine of the Trinity. We seem to forgot the proper view of the Trinity, and that's how we got eternal functional subordination and all these other these things that are being repackaged, heresies from old that are being repackaged to new. I said, what's the next thing to recover theologically in the Reformed world? And he said, anthropology. And I've talked to more than one guy with a PhD with that kind of background that has given that answer. We don't have a good anthropology. We don't have a good, solid, systematic or biblical view of what man is, male and female.
There were 5 people in the PCA 5 years ago who knew what the word concupiscence meant.
Yeah. We had to recover that. We had to recover our understanding. I mean, it's right there in our standards. How do we whiff on this? That, hey, it doesn't become sin when we act upon it. It's already sin within us that needs to be repented of. Even the temptation to something disordered, sinful, of wrong orientation needs to be repented of even before we act upon it. And I would say we still don't really understand this because we still have problems with side B stuff in the PCA, in my opinion.
Very much so.
See it every year. We see it every year at General Assembly.
Yeah.
I'm going to stop right there because I don't have time to deal with another 31 too. But I mean, there was, yeah, I got to stop.
Well,
If I could comment on that, I think Nate's totally right. It's not for lack of resources, but you had feminism, and I mean some of it started in the 1800s, but especially mid to late 20th century, and then you had the complementarian response to it. And while that I think in some ways was helpful, there were some very good writings that came out of it that also clouded things. And that's where we've kind of been, is we've been dealing with some who were taking a more narrow position. They abandoned a lot of the traditional Christian views. So some of what's there is a biblicism. I think especially tied with. I know that word can be used in different ways, but what I mean here is there's somewhat of an abandonment of natural law and taking some of these scriptural teachings, and it's not just the New Testament. We have tons of stuff in the Old Testament for men and women, and also, by the way, we don't ignore the physical reality, right? We understand the differences between the bodies of men and women, and that also should speak to some of these things, especially if you're talking about warfare and the like. And so I'm more of like a natural law maximalist, taking these principles and applying them. And some people want to take a very narrow view, and even very narrow view of the scripture text. And I just don't think that's
it's,
right.
It's almost like, why is there no Bible verse that says I can't build my house and live my life underwater? Why doesn't the Bible speak to that and tell me that I can't do that? It's because it's absurd. Just observing natural law would tell you human being, not fish, can't breathe, can't live underwater. Why would the Bible need to speak to this? And really, up until, just think about this, guys. There's a history book on my shelf in here somewhere. It talks about the history of soul care in America. The liberals, like the president of Yale Divinity School in the early 1900s, the modernist fundamentalist controversy is well on the way. They've already started abandoning theological tenets. But the president of Yale Divinity School said, we need to start recruiting more football captains to come be pastors, because they had this sense of, he was basically saying, we need masculine men leading our churches. That's wild. That's from a theological perspective that like 40 years later was ordaining women. And it's all downstream of there. It's like it just took them that long, cutting off all the authority of scripture and everything else, to lose sight of what they naturally understood just a generation before. And we've followed suit even in our theological conservatism. We've lost sight of what is natural and what is suitable and what is biblical. And so here we are.
And when you think of what this does in the church, so you're talking about, actual warfare, which I think, we have that PCA position paper on, or study report, and has been the universal position up until lately, where some have tried to. I mean, the OPC had 2 reports on this. I think the one is wild, because it was even adopted signed by some big names in the OPC, where they were taking this very narrow, biblicist position and trying to say women could serve in, warfare and the like. But so this is a problem. This is within like conservative Presbyterianism. So this is a problem. But when we think of the pastorate and the office of elder, we refer to them as shepherds. Shepherds are supposed to be strong. They're fending off wolves. They're supposed to protect the sheep. We even have the language of spiritual warfare all throughout the epistles, New Testament epistles. Paul speaks of spiritual warfare, Ephesians 6, regarding the family. What makes you think that we should have women doing these things? Now, it's not because we don't think highly of women or don't love women, but actually because we love them and care for them, we should not put them in such vulnerable positions. Right. God has not designed them to do these things. And we need to be able to say that for their good, for the good of the church. And what happens, and this is some of what we're seeing today in the church, what happens when we basically trying to remove masculinity from from the pastorate, and that can be done both by having women, giving them pseudo offices and the like in the church, but it can also happen by not putting godly and manly men in the pastorate and as elders. We need men. We need godly men. And that's the thing. Pastorate is not for everyone. And if someone's not very manly, I don't really think they should be a pastor. I think they're going to struggle because you're going to have to deal with men, and you're also going to have to deal with women, and you can't be weak and soft and compromising on things. So you need to be smart and wise and tactful. But anyway, so that's my take on this. I think this has become a huge problem.
So is this, you referenced natural law, and is this why never prior to the 19th century did any Orthodox, normal Christian argue for women as deacons, women as elders, women reading scripture publicly, that this was all something that was the duty of godly men? And only since we've forgotten about natural law and creation distinctions that men are abrogating their responsibilities and foisting these burdens upon women?
Well, I do think the deacon issue is a little more complex historically.
Well, not deaconesses, but deacons, ordained women deacons.
Right.
And
right.
With Calvin and many of the reformers, they're always going back and saying, well, the fathers held this. And here's a quote from them that they didn't Google, that they just had memorized. Or with...
No one ever thought this way. It wasn't possible. The world didn't allow for it. But so some of this is modern technology, and even man's work, right? The work of men is different. It's easier in many ways. Some men still have very physically demanding jobs, but if we sit at desks, then that really minimizes the difference between men and women. So that's some of it's been ideology, but I'm very much convinced that the ideology of feminism that came in the 19th century and then 20th century was often fueled or advanced by technological changes. So people didn't have the luxury to think this way. And frankly, if we ended up in like some sort of actual war or whatever, people wouldn't be thinking like a feminist.
Yeah, I mean, there were those commercials, for the lesbian who joins the army and then she's got her two moms back home supporting her. It's just, if we were actually in a war, you're not going to want a girl with two moms on the front line. You're going to want a man. You're going to
or a mom with children. That's just not going to happen.
Yeah, or a mom with kids at all. So at what point do we encourage our colleagues with these views to seek ecclesiastical fellowship elsewhere? Because this is not new, right? This feminist trend, we saw it in 2018 and 2019 with trying to get women on the boards, unordained people, including women, on the boards. We saw an overture that was sent up to allow for women deacons ordained and then withdrawn. But this year we've got more attempts to get women to be ordained. And then, women as preachers. There have been a number of instances, obviously one in New York, but then there was one in Nashville. There was one in South Florida Presbytery where women were allowed to preach. And each time the answer has been, you're not allowed to do that. Is this just a permanent part of the PCA because of the RPCES? The PCA was an old school DNA, whereas the RPCES has that new school heritage. Is this just something that we are going to constantly be sharpening one another and having tension over? Or does it reach a point where we need to say to our colleagues who have these opinions, the PCA is not a denomination where feminist progressive ideology will be tolerated?
Yeah, it's not iron sharpening iron. It's two groups of people like ships passing each other. And I honestly can't believe that at some point there's not going to be, like, I imagine eventually someone will write an overture for there to be a purposeful decoupling of our denomination, because we have two denominations smuggled into one big tent. And it's like how much more time, how much more ink can be spilled we're taking away so much time from the actual work on the ground with our congregation and discipleship and all these other things. And because we have to, because we're contending for really important matters. It's a different.
This is ordination.
It's just part
offices,
of our job.
oracles, and ordinances. I mean, these are the three big O's that Jesus has given to the church.
Yeah, and so I genuinely, I don't think we're ever going to convince these brothers that they're wrong. I think because it really comes down to affection. It's an affection issue. It's not just they have wrong thoughts. It's they have an affection for the egalitarian worldview. And I think it would be really wise if we had an overture and a committee was established and we started basically figuring out how to part ways. Actually, in 2021, the list is even longer and I need to edit it, but I just went through all the different major issues and was like, here's the two sides of this. We have the evangelical Reformed guys in the denomination, and then we have the actual confessional Presbyterians. And here's all the differences. And now we can add, beyond deacon versus deaconesses and all that stuff, we can add all these other things as well to the list. And I just don't know how much longer we can really peaceably coexist. I mean, we're already seeing kind of the proliferation of lawfare in the PCA. I don't like what this guy said. So he's getting a 31-2, and the process is the punishment. There's no chance of him actually being convicted, but we're just going to bury him in this. And so, yeah, that's where I think we need to go, Ryan, is just to have a, for the sake of being able to actually pastor our people. These guys want to pastor their people in one direction. We want to pastor ours in another direction. And, let's just free each other up to do that more. Instead of it being a slow trickle, out this side to the EPC and out this side to independency or a micro-denom, let's rip the Band-Aid off. That's my thought.
I think everyone recognizes that there's not a whole lot of peace in the PCA right now. But that's tied with the fact that there's not right. Purity. And the PCA was founded. I mean, I've read several books on this. I think I can firmly say that the PCA was founded in opposition to feminism as one of the reasons, not the only thing, of course, but and that a lot of these changes have happened trying to push things in a more progressive, semi-feminist direction, whatever you want to call it. This has happened in the last 20 years. The commissioning of deaconesses has been a big part of that, obviously pushed by Tim Keller. And I don't think that should have been allowed, but it was allowed, or it just wasn't dealt with, and then it's kind of festered, and now it's grown into an even bigger problem. But you have that, and this is the thing, is these things never stop. I asked this on Twitter. Let's say you had this narrow complementarian position, like formalized in the PCA, even ordaining, female deacons and allowing women to, be co-laborers or commissioned co-laborers, or even to preach under the authority of the elders. Let's say those things were allowed. Would that stop there? Would it actually stop there? I don't think it would. I mean, we've never seen this stuff stop. It never stops. It always continues to go towards full-blown egalitarianism.
That's what happened to the EPC.
And maybe yes, and maybe there's guys who convictionally hold this more narrow position. I'm not doubting that's the case. I think some actually maybe hold more egalitarian views and are just working within the system. But let's say for the vast majority, they actually hold this narrow complementarian position. What's going to happen in 10 years, 20 years? Their successor at the church, or to go down the line, it is going to blow open and become egalitarian. You can almost guarantee it. This is an inherently unstable position. And the reason is I think it's wrong. Now, I'm happy to debate guys on this. I've written plenty on these things. And so I think I'll take a moment to say this. I've written a lot on this. I don't get a lot of substantive engagement. I've gotten attacked within the PCA, but I don't get a lot of substantive engagement on the arguments. And the reason is I don't think they can defeat the proper views, which I think I hold. And so we're not having open discussion. What we're getting is people trying to just change the rules behind the scenes, or an article like this where it's advocating all of these books in a very egalitarian direction, but not being entirely open with what the goal is. And so this is where we are. And now you have overtures coming up to ordain women as deacons. The latest from the Metro Atlanta Presbytery was to allow like 3 different positions, basically whatever, but it would allow the ordination of women as deacons, right? And one guy, someone in that presbytery told me, so I'm getting this firsthand. He said that a member of that presbytery stood up and argued for that overture, and then he said he was speaking. I've been studying this issue on women and at the eldership even. And what did he say? He said, the arguments for female elders are a lot stronger than I realized. We're already going there. We don't even have ordained female deacons, and we already have men
at the presbyteries,
at least at the presbytery level, openly acknowledging that I'm actually maybe open to female elders. We're already there.
Well, let me ask you, and this is obviously speculative, but in July of 1864, Jubal Early was sent with a corps of Southern troops. We won't say the name lest we get demonetized, but of Confederate troops to march on Washington. And the reason for that was Richmond was under such, and the Valley were under such pressure. It wasn't because the Confederate armies had seen so much success that they're ready to march on Washington. They're doing a Hail Mary with Early's corps, sending them to Washington, hoping to relieve pressure elsewhere, as sort of a last-ditch effort to prolong the war. I wonder, do you think these overtures and this reading list is sort of a last-ditch effort by the progressives and the feminists in the PCA to see, we'll make one more attempt to change the book, and then we've got to follow our conscience? What do you think? We're seeing so much discussion of this. Is this just a last-ditch effort by the, and I think it's a very small minority in the PCA that feels this way. What do you think? They're very vocal, though.
I don't know. I don't know what their goal is. It could be that. It could be to just continue to push and see where it goes. And as long as they can stay around, they'll just keep pushing.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Conservatives are bad at winning, and they know it, and so they know that we don't have, in a lot of cases, we don't have the stomach to push. We get victories at General Assemblies and then we coast. And then the very next year, after landslide victories and all these things, there's a whole bunch of votes that are super close, And so, yeah, I think they'll keep pushing. And yeah, so that's my opinion.
Yeah.
So then the conservative response, and this is the lesson you have to learn, is that you actually have to show these guys the door. You do. If they don't agree with the rules, you tell them, then please leave. And you actually sometimes use, overtures and rules and whatever it takes to get them out. Because there is a difference between just we have some disagreements over some small things. But if you're diametrically opposed to really the DNA of the PCA, our Constitution, the BCO, we've always, prohibited women officers and women, preaching and these kind of things. I would say it's even broader than that, but that's really what we, have in the Constitution. If you're opposed to those things, you shouldn't be in the PCA. Especially in a day and age, this isn't like the old main lines where you didn't have other options at the time. The main line was itself going liberal. You have the EPC, you have ECHO, you have, all sorts of options. I always ask, why did they stay in the PCA? I guess it's the name. It's the largest conservative, Presbyterian denomination. Yeah. There's a lot of networking, and I realize that guys have built up networks of various kinds, church plant networks, etc. But if those things are not for the peace and purity of the church, and you're out of line with the purity of the church, then I mean you shouldn't stay. It's not right. It's not the honest thing to do. It's not.
That's what I don't get. It's like, keep your networks, keep all the relationships. Like if all the people you have a relationship with think this way, y'all can just all leave together. Like, I mean, you could cut the PCA in half. We'd be the two biggest denominations in NAPARC by far.
But the thing is, I don't think it's even close to half
Blow up NAPARC.
that believe in women deacons, that want women to be preaching under the authority of men.
You could decouple.
Yeah.
How do I put this? You could decouple the confessionals and the evangelicals, and if you had this, I call it the Evangelical Reformed Church in America, that denomination will still be bigger than the OPC.
Oh yeah, yeah,
and still have more resources and more networks. That's
and more man buns, probably.
More, maybe so. Floral shirts and flip flops on GA floor, all that stuff. Just go do that. Like, you'd have a pretty big denomination with lots of resources and lots of momentum and lots of networks, and then you wouldn't have. My appeal is, brothers, you wouldn't have BC and Garris and Zanders and all these other guys constantly overturing stuff at your General Assembly that bother you. Free yourself from the burden of having to deal with us. That's what I'm making my case to them about is, do you not see how these constant battles? I mean, how many overtures for Louisville are we already up to? I mean, it's wild.
It's literally dueling overtures.
Yeah, like don't you want to just not do this every year? Like, wouldn't you like a GA, even if there's 60% less fewer guys in the room? Wouldn't you like a General Assembly where we're not constantly changing the BCO and because we've got people that have admitted from the General Assembly before, but for almost 2 decades they've been thumbing their nose at the rules, and now we've narrowed what they're allowed to do. They keep on doing it, and now if we defeat these overtures, will they stop? I just don't think they will. And I think at some point we just have to be practical and say, hey, we're just slamming our foreheads against each other, and we're not, this is not peaceful. We're a huge burden on the peace of the church, and that's where I'm at. And I'm going to continue to try to hold the line where I can, but at some point I think the two sides should just consider parting ways en masse rather than continuing to watch the slow trickles out the side doors over the course of the next 30 years.
Yeah.
Well, maybe we'll get something, decisive at the General Assembly with one of these overtures. I don't know. I mean, that's the problem. Is it's possible that just everything just keeps losing, and we're in a stalemate, and that's. But
the Constitution we have is so good. The Constitution we have, as you point out, does not allow women to preach, does not allow for deaconesses, does not allow for unordained deacons. Now, I realize that the word deaconess doesn't appear in our Book of Church Order. That's the point. There are no PCA deaconesses. It's a pretend title, just like that tree that someone bought you for Christmas in Scotland that made you a laird. It's pretend. You're not actually a Scottish laird. So our book is good.
There's no commissioning. There's no commissioning co-laborers. There's no commissioning shepherdesses. These things don't exist. Somebody made them up. And then they said, well, it's not in the BCO, so it doesn't say we can't do it. And my response is that really how you're going to, treat the Book of Church Order?
That's a very Baptist way to look at the Constitution.
I would even say that's an insult to Baptists. I mean, you know what I mean? Like, it's like, how do these guys govern their lives? How do they teach their children? Do their kids say, you didn't tell me I couldn't do this crazy thing that made no sense? It's like, how do you approach life?
Just misunderstands how a church constitution functions. It's not, these are all of the things that you can do. It's not restrictive in that way. These are the principles by which you govern the church in Christ's name, because he's the head of the church. All right, well, that sounds like we got 2 more podcasts to do, at least on these subjects. But Nate Sanders and Zach Garris, any closing thoughts?
No, just thanks
Yeah.
for having us. And
Thanks
to
for
be
making the
here.
time zones work.
yeah, I hope these things, yeah. Mountain time makes it difficult, but I'm glad we could.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you.
Yep. See you later, Ryan.
Bye. Thanks for joining the conversation on the Westminster Standard, which is the podcast of Jude 3. For more information or to support our work at promoting confessional renewal within the Presbyterian Church in America, please visit our website, jude3pca.org. Join us again next time. I'll talk to you then.